courtroom hums with a restless heat. A packed gallery of bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, their whispers curling like smoke through the stale air. Judge Thompson lounges behind his bench, his black robe hanging loose over a frame too comfortable with power, his lips twisted into a smirk that drips with venom. Before him stands a woman, her thick curves draped in a modest gray dress, her hands clasped tight to steady the tremor no one else can see. She's a mountain of softness in a room of sharp edges, and he drinks her in, not with desire but with something crueler. Well, he drawls, his voice slick as oil. I didn't know they let livestock stand trial these days. Laughter erupts, a jagged chorus from the spectators, the bailiff, the lawyers, slicing through the humidity like a blade. He leans forward, his eyes glinting. What's the charge? Eating the evidence? More laughter, louder now, a storm of it, and her cheeks burn beneath the weight of their stares. She doesn't flinch. Her eyes, dark and steady, lock onto his, and the air shifts, thickens, as if the room itself senses the storm brewing beneath her silence. Her fingers dip into the worn leather bag at her side, slow and deliberate, pulling free a glint of metal that catches the light. A badge. The laughter dies, snuffed out like a candle in a gust. Judge Thompson, she says, her voice cutting through the hush, low and molten. You're under arrest. His smirk freezes, then cracks. Abuse of power, harassment. Obstruction of justice. I've been watching you for months. The gallery gasps, a collective inhale that sucks the oxygen from the room. Court officers surge forward, their cuffs flashing as they seize him, his protest swallowed by the clatter of steel. She stands taller now, her quiet pride a flame that scorches the space where shame once lingered. The judge's throne is empty now, his gavel abandoned, and the room watches her, once a target, now a predator, in stunned reverence. The betrayed system turns inward, devouring its own, and she is its sharpened edge. The silence lingers, heavy and electric, as the officers drag Judge Thompson from his perch. His polished shoes scrape the floor, a pitiful rhythm against the murmurs swelling in the gallery. His face twists, shock melting into rage, then into something softer, something pleading, but she doesn't look at him. She adjusts the strap of her bag, her movements precise, sensual in their restraint, as if every gesture is a dance she's rehearsed in the dark. The spectators shift, their eyes darting between her and the man who moments ago held their laughter in his palm. Betrayal hums beneath the surface, a current too deep to name, and the room feels alive with it. Passion twisted into vengeance, power flipped on its head. The air in Bakersfield, California, had been thick with dust and secrets long before Elena Vasquez arrived, a gritty haze that clung to the skin and stung the lungs. This was a city of cracked asphalt and sunburnt dreams, where the oil rigs hummed a low dirge and the San Joaquin Valley sprawled like a tired beast under an unforgiving sky. Corruption wasn't a rumor here, it was a currency, traded in backrooms and barstools, as common as the tumbleweeds that skittered down Main Street. Elena slipped into this world 6 months ago, a shadow among shadows, her presence unnoticed by the men who thought they owned the place. She wasn't here to save Bakersfield, she was here to dissect it. Her assignment from the federal task force had been deceptively simple: infiltrate, observe, report. Whispers had reached D.C., judges taking bribes, cases rigged like carnival games, defendants railroaded by a justice system too bloated and broken to care. The intel was patchy, but the stench of rot was unmistakable. Elena was their scalpel, sent to cut through the lies and lay bare the bones. She wasn't what they pictured when they'd tapped her. Not the sleek, steely agent of Hollywood's imagination, but a woman whose body carried the weight of a life lived fully. Round hips, a belly that spilled over her waistband, arms that jiggled when she waved dismissively at the desk clerk who'd asked for her ID. Her wardrobe was a quiet rebellion, muted colors, loose fabrics, nothing to draw the eye. But her eyes, Dios mío, her eyes were a storm trapped in amber, watching everything, missing nothing. Elena had learned early that invisibility was power, The world discounted what it didn't desire: too fat, too brown, too soft, and she'd turned that neglect into a weapon. She'd grown up in a crumbling apartment in East LA, the daughter of a seamstress whose hands bled from factory needles and a father who'd vanished before her 5th birthday. Her mother, Rosa, had been a soft woman too, her body a map of sacrifice, her spirit worn thin by men who mocked her accent and her dreams. Elena had had her shrink under their laughter, her pride ground into dust by a supervisor who'd called her too slow one too many times. That was the first betrayal. Elena understood, not her father's absence, but the world's casual cruelty to the unseen. She'd sworn then, a child with fists clenched and tears unshed, never again. Her cover in Bakersfield was airtight, a temp worker in the county clerk's office, shuffling papers amid the hum of fluorescent lights and the clack of ancient typewriters. Her thick fingers, stained with ink, moved with a deceptive clumsiness, her smile disarming enough to loosen tongues. She listened as secretaries griped about late-night meetings with Judge Thompson, as bailiffs bragged about pocketing cash to lose evidence, as lawyers swapped favors like baseball cards. She filed it all away, her memory a steel trap, her reports to decoded, in shorthand only her handler, a gruff ex-Marine named Carter, could crack. She'd sit in her rented studio apartment at night, the walls thin enough to hear the neighbor's TV, and scribble her notes under the flicker of a single bulb. Each word was a brick in the wall she was building, one that would topple the men who thought themselves untouchable. The real prize was Judge Harold Thompson himself, a man who wore his robe like a king's mantle, his courtroom a stage for his petty cruelties. 58, twice divorced, a golf handicap that matched his temper, short and volatile. He'd climbed the bench, on charm and connections, a Bakersfield boy turned local legend. But the cracks showed if you knew where to look. Late-night calls to bookies, a safe stuffed with cash, a mistress who doubled as his court assistant. Elena had dossiers thick with dirt. Wiretaps catching his gravelly voice, famous leniency for a price, photos of him slipping envelopes in dimly lit parking lots, sworn statements from clerks he'd bullied into silence. She'd studied him like a hunter studies prey, mapping his habits, his weaknesses, his arrogance. He was the heart of the rot, and she'd been sent to rip it out. The case that landed her in his crosshairs was a flimsy thing, a petty theft accusation, a snatched purse from a gas station lot, pinned on her by a clerk too lazy to check the Turkey footage. It was perfect. A low-stakes trap she could spring when the time was right. She'd let it play out, let them haul her in, let the wheels turn until she stood before him, her head bowed just enough to sell the act. She knew he'd bite. Men like Thompson couldn't resist a soft target, the chance to flex their malice. And he didn't disappoint. The courtroom that day was a crucible, simmering with the heat of too many bodies and too little truth. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of the curious, the bored and the vengeful, their chatter a low buzz that pulsed against the peeling walls. The air smelled of sweat and stale coffee. The windows streaked with grime that filtered the sunlight into a sickly yellow glow. Thompson presided like a god gone sour, his jowls quivering as he scanned the docket, his mood already soured by a late lunch and a caddy who dared to outdrive him on the 9th hole. His robe hung loose over a frame that had once been athletic but now sagged with indulgence, his thinning hair combed back in a futile bid for dignity. When Elena's name was called, Elena Vasquez, petty theft, he barely looked up, his fingers drumming a lazy tattoo on the bench. She shuffled forward, her dress clinging to her thighs, her shoes scuffing the floor, a portrait of nerves and defeat. The gallery tittered, sensing blood in the water. She wore a faded gray shift that bunched at her hips, her hair pulled into a messy bun, strands escaping to frame a face that bore no makeup, no armor. She was every inch the downtrodden nobody they expected. And they ate it up. The public defender, a kid barely out of law school with a rumpled suit and a nervous tic, stood beside her, flipping through her file like it was a takeout menu he hadn't bothered to read. The prosecutor, a wiry man with a permanent smirk, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, already counting the win. Thompson started slow, his voice a gravelly purr that filled the room. Elena Vasquez, huh? What'd you do, eat the evidence? The room erupted. A hyena's laugh that shook the rafters, heads turned, eyes glinted, and the gallery fed off his cruelty like it was a drug. Elena stood there, her face a mask, letting it wash over her. He leaned forward, emboldened, his eyes raking her frame with a sneer that was half disgust, half delight. I didn't know we had a weight limit for defendants. He must have crushed the scale. More laughter, sharper now, a blade finding its mark. The prosecutor's smirk widened, the bailiff coughed into his fist, and even the court reporter's lips twitched as her fingers danced over the keys. Elena's hands tightened around her bag, the leather creaking under her grip, but her eyes stayed locked on his calm, unyielding, a predator sizing up prey. He didn't see it. He was too busy riding the wave, his cruelty a lover's caress to his ego. What's your defense, huh? Too slow to run? The gallery roared, and he basked in it, oblivious to the shift in her stance, the way her shoulders squared beneath the frumpy fabric. She reached into her bag, her movements liquid, sensual in their deliberation, and pulled out the badge. The metal gleamed, a cold fire in her palm, and the room choked on its own mirth. Judge Thompson, she said, her voice a blade wrapped in velvet. You're under arrest. The words landed like a guillotine, severing the laughter, the arrogance, the illusion of his dominion. His face crumpled, a house of cards in a gust. What is this? He stammered, his hands gripping the bench as if it could anchor him. The officers were already moving, two feds in plain clothes who'd been waiting in the back row, their boots a drumbeat on the hardwood. Steel clicked around his wrists, and he thrashed, a fish on a hook, his robe flapping like broken wings. This is outrageous. Do you know who I am? His voice cracked, the desperate plea to a room that no longer cared. Elena watched, her lips parting just enough to hint at a smile. Not triumph, but something darker, something that tasted of betrayal turned sweet. The gallery sat frozen, their earlier jeers now ash in their throats, their eyes darting between the woman they'd mocked and the man they'd feared. The officers hauled him toward the door, his protests fading into a pitiful whine. You can't do this, I'll have your badge. But she already had his fate in her grip, and it was heavier than he'd ever know. She adjusted her bag, the leather creaking under her touch, and stepped forward, her hips swaying with a quiet power that hadn't been there before. The courtroom was hers now, a stage flipped on its axis, and she played it like a maestro, every glance, every breath, a note in a symphony of reckoning. Back in D.C., Carter had warned her over a crackling phone line, his voice rough from too many cigarettes. Thompson's slippery, loves the spotlight, hates the rules, don't get too close. She'd nodded, her lips pursed, but closeness was never the plan. She'd studied him from afar, piecing together the man behind the myth. He'd been a prosecutor once, a golden boy with a winning smile and a knack for closing cases, until the wins started coming too easy, the deals too quiet. The bench was his reward, a throne built on favors and fear. She'd spent nights poring over his life, the ex-wives who'd left with alimony and bitterness, the golf buddies who doubled as fixers, the mistress, a bottle-blonde paralegal named Tammy, who typed his rulings and warmed his bed. Elena had tracked his routines, court at 9, lunch at the country club, drinks at the Rusty Spur with men who paid in cash and silence. She'd felt the pull of him, the danger, not attraction but fascination. The way he wielded power like a lover, seductive and brutal, made her pulse quicken. She hated that part of herself, the part that wondered what it'd be like to match him, to dance in that fire. Betrayal was her shield, her sword. She'd seen too many Thompsons, men who thought the world bent for them, who crushed the soft, the small, the unseen. Her mother's face flashed in her mind too often. Rosa, hunched over a sewing machine, her fingers raw, her eyes dull from years of being told she wasn't enough. Elena had been 16 when Rosa collapsed. A stroke, they said, but Elena knew it was shame that killed her. Shame pressed into her by a boss who'd laughed at her weight, her broken English, her pleas for a raise. That man had walked away unscathed, while Rosa's body was lowered into a pauper's grave. Elena had stood there, dry-eyed and furious, and made a vow she'd bury them all, every last one who thought power was their birthright. This wasn't personal, she told herself, as she watched Thompson's empire crumble. It was principle, but the lie tasted bitter. The arrest was only the beginning. By sundown, the courthouse steps swarmed with reporters, their cameras a buzzing hive, Mrs. Vasquez, did you plan this? What's next? They shouted, their microphones thrusting toward her like spears. She slipped through, her hoodie pulled low, her mother's voice in her ear. No Myers atrás, Misha. Keep going. Inside, the system churned. Thompson's lawyer, a shark named Grayson, with slick hair and a $5,000 suit, screamed mistrial, his voice echoing through the halls. Cronies scrambled to shred files, their hands trembling as they fed paper into machines that jammed on their panic. The feds descended like locusts, seizing records, freezing accounts, their badges flashing in the chaos. Elena's reports, months of meticulous betrayal, became the backbone of a grand jury indictment. Abuse of power was the least of it. Bribery, extortion, evidence tampering piled up like bodies in a war zone. The house of cards wasn't just down, it was at. She stood in her cramped apartment that night, the Bakersfield dust coating her windows, and stared at the badge on her dresser. It felt heavier now, a lover's token turned burden. The passion of the day, the thrill of flipping the script, of watching him fall, had faded into something hollow. She'd won, but the system hadn't blinked. It just spat out another Thompson, another courtroom, another soft target. Her phone buzzed. Carter, terse as ever, good work. Next assignment's in Fresno. Same deal. She didn't reply. Instead, she poured a glass of cheap tequila, the burn a quiet betrayal of her own resolve, and sank onto the sagging couch. The room smelled of mildew and regret, the walls stained with the ghosts of tenants past. She tipped the glass back, letting the liquor sear her throat, and wondered how many more she could bury before the weight crushed her too. Outside, the city buzzed with her shadow. The Fat Fed, they called her, half in awe, half in scorn. The name scrawled in barroom graffiti and whispered in diner booths. Thompson's trial loomed, a circus of deflecting and finger-pointing, his charm curdled into desperation. The gallery that once laughed now spun her story. Some true, some myth, each telling a little more ragged than the last. She'd been a nobody, they said, a clerk who'd stumbled into heroism, or a mastermind, a femme fatale in frumpy clothes, or a traitor, a snitch who'd sold out her own. Elena didn't care. She was gone by then, a ghost in Fresno, her badge tucked away, her eyes scanning a new courtroom, a new Thompson. Fresno was hotter, meaner, the air thick with pesticide and resentment. The assignment was the same, a judge named Alvarez, a man with a taste for cocaine and a ledger of debts paid in verdicts. Elena settled into another temp job, another stack of papers, her fingers moving with the same deliberate grace. But something had shifted. The passion remained, an ember she couldn't douse. But the betrayal of the system, of herself, grew heavier with every step. She'd sit in her new apartment, a mirror of the last, and replay Bakersfield Thompson's face. As the cuffs snapped shut, the galleries stunned in silence, the weight of her badge in her hand. She'd won, yes, but what? A headline, a pat on the back from Carter. The rot didn't stop. It just grew new heads, a hydra she couldn't slay. One night, after a long day of filing and listening, she walked to a dive bar, on the edge of town. The neon sign flickered El Toro, the bull's horns cracked and dim. Inside, the air was stale with beer and cigarette smoke, the jukebox crooning a mariachi tune that reminded her of Rosa. She ordered a tequila, then another, and watched the locals, farm workers with calloused hands, truckers with tired eyes, women who laughed too loud to hide their weariness. She wondered if they'd ever sat in Alvarez's courtroom, if they'd felt the gavel's weight on their lives. A man slid onto the stool beside her, his breath sour with whiskey. "You're that Fed, huh? The one who took down Thompson?" His voice was slurred, curious, a little hostile. She didn't look at him, just sipped her drink. "Heard you're some kind of hero, or a bitch, depending who you ask." She turned then, her eyes meeting his amber storms against his bloodshot haze. "What do you think?" she asked, her voice low, daring him to choose. He blinked, then laughed, a rogue sound that ended in a cough. "I think you're trouble, lady. Good kind of trouble, maybe." He slid off the stool and stumbled away, leaving her alone with the tequila and her thoughts. Trouble. She liked that. It fit better than hero, better than traitor. Weeks bled into months. Alvarez was crazier than Thompson, his corruption veiled in charm and careful steps. Elena played her role, her notes piling up, her reports weaving another web. But the hollow grew. She'd call Carter sometimes, late at night when the tequila loosened her tongue, and ask the question she couldn't shake. Does it ever change? He'd grunt, his voice crackling through the line. You're not there to change it, Vasquez. You're there to cut it out, leave the healing to someone else. She'd hang up, unsatisfied, and stare at the badge she no longer wore on her chest, but kept like a talisman, or a curse. One evening, as the Fresno sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, she stood outside Alvarez's courthouse. It was smaller than Bakersfield's, the stone chipped and weathered, but it loomed just the same. She lit a cigarette, a habit she'd picked up somewhere between Thompson's fall and this new hunt, and watched the clerks file out, their faces tired, their secrets tucked away. She exhaled a plume of smoke and thought of Rosa, of the promise she'd made. Never again. But how many agains could she take? How many Thompsons, how many Alvarezes? Before the system swallowed her too. Justice, she'd learned, was a lover who never stayed the night. It kissed her with the thrill of the takedown, the rush of flipping the script, then left her cold in the aftermath. She flicked the cigarette to the ground, crushed it under her heel, and walked back to her car. The badge waited on her dresser, heavy and silent, a mirror to the woman she'd become. Tomorrow she'd step into Alvarez's world, her eyes sharp, her betrayal ready. Tonight she'd drink to the ember that still burned, the one that whispered one more. Always one more.